And we have the first speaker today, which is Caglar Koksal from the University of Manchester, who's going to talk on using neighbourhood plans to decarbonise local transport via neighbourhood plans, a systems perspective. The paper is co-authored by Mark Baker. So over to you, Caglar.
Thank you very much. Just give me a second to share my screen.
Sure.
And could you tell me if you can you tell me if you can see it?
You can see it.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for organizers giving me the space. I'm going to present a project funded by Decarbonise itself. We got the funding, I think, roughly two years ago, to do a bit of a small pilot study in a place called Carnforth, and it's north of Lancaster for those who do not know, to basically test whether we can actually use neighborhood plans, which are part of the statutory land use regime, the planning system in England, to decarbonize local transport. And this is a project that I run with a colleague of mine, Mark Baker. So the neighborhood plans are a small scale land use plan, development plans that are unique to England. It's not in Scotland, it's not in Wales, but just in England. And with lots of talk about decarbonisation transport, we always talk about electric cars, top to bottom interventions, tax regime changes, and all the different things. But we often do not talk about what we actually can do from a bottom-up, community-initiated ways of actually decarbonising transport. The way that transport governance works in this country is quite top to bottom, it's quite rigid. So there isn't much room for even communities to actually do anything. But I kind of think that there's a missed opportunity within the land use system we have in England, that there might be an opportunity to actually to decarbonize transport, which I'm going to show you a bit later. So this pilot project, as I mentioned earlier, and I can't thank enough the town council in Carnforth, with their help, with their inputs, with their help with organizing workshops, and then all the meetings that we have since the initiation of the project. So what I'm going to talk basically today is what the problem I'm trying to tackle with this project, what methods that I employ to understand the problem and then to create the solutions, and also what solutions that we found that works, not just in Carnforth, but in other areas as well, and what resources we have. So I produced a toolkit, which I will talk about later, and there's a few other things that I want to do as well. So I'll briefly talk about them. So first, the problem, what problem I'm trying to actually solve here. So these are from the census 2011, outbound commuting modes of transport in Carnforth and inbound commuting mode. What it means basically, the first graph shows the people who live in Carnforth and commuting outside Carnforth, most likely Lancaster or Preston or Manchester in some cases. And inbound commuting is the people who live outside Carnforth and commuting in Carnforth. And you will see that the most, close to 80% is the motorized vehicle. These are like cars, passenger cars, vans, or motorcycles. And the graph on the right shows very clearly the carbon, in terms of air pollution, carbon dioxide is a major problem. And I don't know if you can see it, but the legend says that the green is between 100 and 2000, and anything yellow is above 2000. There's a massive difference between the coastal areas, which is the west side of Carnforth, and the main route that goes through Carnforth, which is the A6 road. So why do people travel with their cars? Because it's the location, it's the geography. So Carnforth is a small market town. It has it's a really good rail connections with Lancaster and the Lake District, and it's located right in the middle of the very good outstanding natural beach areas, and it's a fantastic place. But it also has two problems. First is the motorway, just runs next to it, and A6, which is a major road, connects Lake District to London. So it's one of those old Roman roads that, that they exist for at least 2,000 years. And it's quite far away from the major employment sites. So you'll see just on the south of it, you have Lancaster, which is where most people travel to for their work. If you go a bit further south, you will have Preston, and you will have Manchester and the Leeds as well. So people that I spoke to who live in Carnforth, they told me that they love the place because how close it is to nature, but also how close it is to Manchester and Preston and Leeds. So they commute. That's why they have a car, because the train services, even though it has a rail connection, it's infrequent, not convenient. It has very good connections to the motorway and the A6, so people think it's convenient choice. And the way that I'm presenting here Carnforth is that is a typical English town or village, whereby you live just outskirts of the major employment centers. You have very little public transportation, if anything at all, and you are reliant on your car to get your job, take your children to school, do your shopping, go to the bank, go to the hospital. And Carnforth experience is not unique. So all the other small villages across the country where we see the car-dependent culture, basically I'm trying to tell their story using Carnforth. This kind of helps to understand the details of the problem. So average annual daily traffic flow in Carnforth, cars are dominating in the last 20 years, so not much has changed. In fact, in terms of when you look at the percentage, the cars are dominating, but in terms of looking at the amount of traffic the cars create, it's increasing. It's not increasing tremendously, but increasing steadily, which is a worrying image, because we know that the carbon dioxide, most of the carbon dioxide in the surface transport comes from the passengers' cars. And one of the things that I'm trying to highlight with this project is that when we're decarbonizing transport, we are not just getting rid of cars, we're getting rid of airport pollution. We're also getting rid of obesity. We're also getting rid of creating opportunities for the local employment. So the core benefits of decarbonization of transport at small scale neighborhood area is another thing that I'm very much focused on in this project. So what methods did I use? So once I established the problem that, how much carbon dioxide is coming from the surface transport in Carnforth, which is the problem I'm trying to tackle, is that what methods I should employ to understand and come up with the solutions. So I employed something called action research, which basically meant that I was pretty much involved with the production of the neighborhood plan, which was done by the Carnforth Town Council to decarbonize their transport. I was involved with the draft section. I was involved with the come up with the solutions. I was involved with the meetings. I organized workshops. I did an online survey. So I was pretty much involved with from the middle of the process towards the end. And that was, again, thanks to the Carnforth Town Council and their generosity with their time. Also, Troy Planning and Design, who was a private consultancy employed by council to create the plan. Another two methods I employed was a theory of change. So once we established that carbon from surface transport, carbon dioxide from surface transport was a problem, we said, okay, we understand the problem. We try to come up with an ideal scenario whereby that, we can perhaps decarbonize it. So we established an aim. And through using that aim, we try to using the backward mapping, see that, what sort of preconditions that we need to achieve that aim. If our aim is to achieve that majority of travel within Carnforth will be by active travel or public transportation by 2050, for example, which was the aim that we put together, is that what will the precondition of that? What will the things that we need to do right now to achieve that in 2050? And once we start doing all these mappings and then putting everything together, it becomes so complex that I'll just run out of ideas. I'll just run out of space on my piece of paper to write things down. So I employ something called causal loop diagrams or systems thinking to help me to organize these things in a more orderly fashion, to help me to find where are the connections, the causal links are, what will be the unintended and intended consequences will look like, what will be the implications, increasing something, providing more space for cycling infrastructure, for example. What will the implications of that on economy or car traffic or placemaking in general? So this is the tool that we employed to come up with the solutions and backward mapping. I was hoping to show this on the website itself because it's interactive. You click on things, it shows where the feedback loops are and everything. But unfortunately, my account is suspended for I don't know why. So I need to sort that out. But what I'm glad that I took a screen grab before this happened. Essentially, what this shows is the black dots are the problems. So the gem color at the top is the carbon dioxide from surface transport in Carnforth. And what I'm trying to find out is that what contributes, what creates it. So that in Carnforth, two major sources that create carbon dioxide was passenger cars and LGV and the low good and high good vehicle cars. So I came back one step before and try to understand, okay, what the passenger cars do, why people drive their cars. They either drive for short distance travel or long distance travel. And I ask people for short distance, for example, why do they travel? They travel either for the school to drop their children because there are 3 or 4 schools in Carnforth, or they travel to their shopping. So I'm trying to ask people, okay, to stop using your car for short distance travel within Carnforth, what would you need me for? What can I do for you? What do you need to actually to replace that behavior? So by asking these questions, we start developing some plans and scenarios. And this graph is actually quite useful to understand how everything is connected with each other. So the orange dots are the main areas of intervention for walking infrastructure, cycling infrastructure, bus transport, and the yellow nodes are the main examples, main interventions themselves. And when I was trying to building this, one thing it became very clear that car parking space is the main problem, is the main roadblock to roll out these interventions. Coming from the urban planning perspective, space is one of the key things that always help me to understand what sort of things we can do. And car parking, the space that allocated for car parking is the major problem. And if I can't tackle with that issue, then there's basically nothing I can do, because it's going to always be anything I can do will be very, very, very marginal in terms of what I can do if I didn't have that problem. So once we created these solutions, I try to understand what we can actually do in Carnforth. So one of the main missions, I don't know if it's okay to say that it's a mission or a principle within the Decarbonise project, the organization or the consortium, is the social acceptance and social readiness of interventions and solutions. So I have 2 aims as far as I'm concerned, is that first, how can I make sure take full advantage of all the solutions that I have, which has strong local support, and realize that. And second aim is, what can I do with the solutions that have weak local support and perhaps change them? What do I need to convince the local community to accept these solutions? Perhaps, for example, what they didn't like, again, car parking is a major problem. Perhaps I can find design interventions, whereas the car parking is protected, but we can perhaps move cycle lane in somewhere else, and then you come up with some solutions. So this is what I've been struggling, or what I've been working on in the last few months. As a result, I created a toolkit. It's like 35 pages, where I listed all the solutions that are applicable to small villages such as Carnforth or small areas in big urban cities, that available from the neighborhood planning perspective, land use perspective. I also provide examples in there. I also provided the best case practices, examples from either from England or somewhere else, or somewhere in the UK, such as Scotland. And this toolkit is a PDF document. It is also going to be an interactive web page, depending on if I can secure the extra funding for that. But essentially, I already have the document. I'm just currently proofreading it. I just got back from the designers, the final versions, and I will send this toolkit to all the local communities, the neighborhood communities that are doing neighborhood plans at the moment, which is thousands of them, and just to see that if there's anything they can use with. So there's a great potential with this toolkit. Second thing that I did with the PGA consultancy is to come up with these design interventions that I was just mentioning earlier, that we can protect the car parking. I don't want to say protect car parking, but that's something that I can't get rid of easily. It's how we can still increase active travel and public transportation without losing any car parking provisions within Carnforth. So this is a document that we produced with PGA and provided a supply to the Carnforth Town Council. And it's up to them how much they can do or they want to do, but that's something we produced. And thirdly, again, depending on the further funding, what I want to do is to test basically the results that I found using Carnforth in other places, developing metrics and indicators of success, because we already put forward a few policies within the emerging neighborhood plan. And I would like to see that within the next 5-10 years, how much change they actually caused. Third thing is that we're looking at providing some measurement tools to collect hyperlocal data, again, just help us with the metrics and indicators. And training for both the local authority planners and also communities. If I can find, again, a bit of more funding, then what I want to do is that within the website I'm going to create, I will have that toolkit already. I will have the interactive version of that toolkit, but also I will provide training opportunities for the local communities, how to use land use planning, neighborhood plans to decarbonize their transport. So as a summary, I think there's close to 3,000 neighborhood areas designated in England at the moment. And I think there's a missed opportunity because most of these neighborhood plans, they are more or less focused on protecting the environment, which is good, and also building more houses, which is also good. But there's very, very little, if anything, about transport or anything about decarbonization of transport. And I think that's a missed opportunity. If all these neighborhood plans have one or two policies about sustainable travel or decarbonization of transport, I will believe that we could have seen some real improvements in the lives of millions of people. So with this project, this is something that I want to change. Providing this toolkit, sending to communities, and help them to understand, there's something they can do within their authority, within their neighborhood area, to help them find solutions that comes from the community, solutions that are applicable to their local area, and the things that actually, that they can learn from, some other areas as well. So apologies, it's a bit faster than I wanted to be because it's been going on for a year and a half, and there's a lot to talk about. But the toolkit, at the moment, I'm proofreading it, but we're hoping to launch it in a month's time, maybe even before. So if you want to know more about it, you can see the details of the project and the toolkit in a month's time in our current web page at the Special Policy and Analysis Laboratory. And if I can, if I have further improvements on the project, then I will also let people know either using Twitter, Decarbonise platform, or through our website. And that was it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Caglar. And you have been spot on. I didn't have to come in to intervene to stop you or give you the 3-minute warning. So that was very, very good and well timed. And thank you for an insightful presentation exploring the extent to which neighborhood plans can be a good framework to offer place-based community led solutions to decarbonize local travel choices and transport infrastructure. So thank you once again. So I'd request all participants, if you have any comments or any questions, please post it on the chat and we will pick it up at the end of the talk, of all the talks, and we can have a Q&A session. So I'd like to invite the second speaker, who's Celia Verlingeri from the TSU University of Oxford. And her talk is on street experiments between engagement, grassroots action, and antagonism, a case of Turin Mobility Lab. The paper is co-authored by Elisabetta Brovarone and Luca Sterico. Over to you, Ercilia.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much everyone for attending this session today. Yes, I'm Ercilia, member of the Transport Studies Unit and also of the Active Travel Academy of the University of Westminster. And this is a piece of work we've been doing with Elisabetta and Luca, who are a researcher at the Polytechnic of Turin, which I have to thank because they've been hosting me for a few months this summer. And it's an ongoing project, so we're just finishing analyzing the data. So pardon, there's still some things to be refined, but I thought it was very interesting to discuss this theme with you today. And reflecting on the increasing use of strict experiments or idea linked to tactical urbanism, also as a strategy towards decarbonization, but also as something which is becoming increasingly important in light to improve urban areas, linked to themes around air pollution and pedestrian safety and so on. And I think I'm going to touch also around some of the themes that Greg mentioned this morning. So perhaps reflecting about the risk of a post-political approach also when we're looking at place-based solutions. So as I said, strict experiments and the idea of tactical urbanism are becoming increasingly popular to support transition, and especially the adoption of active travel options for shorter journeys. And in the slides, you can see a map that we collected together for a paper we just published, which maps all the LTNs that have been introduced in London last year, but also pictures from London, another one from Samarthia, from Barcelona, from Milano, where there's been these experiments around closing the road or introducing new pop-up bike lanes. In general, differently from the original more bottom-up idea of a DIY tactical urbanism, these new street experiments are top-down actions, which are characterized, we can say, from two different aspects. Firstly, what we can say a planning by doing approach, in which a temporary low-cost first intervention is then readjusted, responding to local feedbacks and potentially made permanent. And secondly, a co-design element, which will benefit from the very local scale and also from the temporary nature of the intervention. But as we've seen last year and still seeing nowadays, this intervention have caused a lot of controversies, and what has been called the LTN's wars in London is only one of the examples of what's happened also in other places. So we wanted to reflect on the role of street experiment in the broader context of automobility, which is, I think, a term we're all familiar with, but just to remind it, automobility is defined as an expanding and self-reinforcing system of social, technical, and political practices which are locking in car dependency. And so we wanted to think of like, what is the role of street experiment with respect to automobility? Was there potential to challenge some aspects of it? And the literature so far has looked at street experiments, especially from the perspective of behavioral change, which you can see only as one aspect of challenging automobility, proving that they can be in fact useful in triggering some changes, the adoption of active travel more broadly, and also to some extent a reduction in car use. And the example of Waltham Forest has been cited many times in this regard. But also, for example, a review published by Luca Bertolini recently, these changes, when, at least as what it says so far, remain often localized and struggle to go on a broader scale. On the other hand, there is a reflection in the broader literature around urban studies and geography, which has reflected on the use of experiments, especially which are becoming increasingly popular in the context of climate change emergency, showing that there is a risk that they might distract from broader systemic change that is needed. So we wanted to reflect on this kind of unsolved question in the literature, using a case study, which is very interesting for two main reasons. First of all, because it's a very large-scale project, which almost defies the level of simple experiment we've seen in other places. So it's an experiment which aims at involving the different aspects of mobilities of an entire borough of about 50,000 people. So as a frame of comparison, all plans that have been introduced in London last year were covering an area where there were about 300,000 people living. So it's a quite big area that's been included as part of the Torino Mobility Lab. And secondly, because Turin is, as we call, the city of the automobile, which can be seen as a critical case to understand the implication of a certain type of changes on automobility. And so I'm going to explain you, as I said, these are preliminary findings. I'm drawing on the results of 3 months fieldwork and interviews with 15 stakeholders, and also the review of many policy documents and results of the engagement process that have been done in Turin last year. So just a bit more about the project. The Torino Mobility Lab starts in 2018 as a project co-financed by the Ministry of Environment, which is called the National Experimental Program of Sustainable Mobility. And the Council identifies the neighbourhood of San Salvario as a potential good candidate for this fund, which is a semi-peripheral and challenging neighbourhood, as been defined by some of the policymakers. So it's a place which is, I say, close to the train station, has many local schools, the Polytechnic is there as well, and there are also many local associations which have shown in the past year an interest in talking about sustainable mobility. There's also very high rate of car dependency and previous issues around car parking, and also conflicts around nightlife and residential life in the streets. And in the map you can see one of the different versions of what the Torino Mobility Lab has been, could have been, because there's been many changes on the plan, but you can see that there is a combination of bike lanes in green, pedestrian areas in pink, school streets in green, and then there's also like an attempt to render the whole neighborhood at 30 km per hour zone. In the original plan, there was also the idea of expanding the bike sharing system and options for bike training and mobility managers with the schools. So the Torino Mobility Lab is an experiment on 3 senses, we think. So first of all, it's a classical tactical urbanism experiment with color pavements, new street furniture, bike racks, aimed at repopulating streets as social spaces. The second one, because it's a participatory governance experiment, as the All Mobility Lab is accompanied by an ambitious program of participation and monitoring, as it's been called by the Council, which is being subcontracted to a local partnership between cities and associations and different other institutions. And finally, because the city of Turin intends to use this as a living lab for thinking ahead, for learning what should be done inside of similar projects planning ahead in the next few years. So the Torino Mobility Lab starts in 2019 and is soon impacted by the pandemic, which means that on the one hand, the pandemic hinders a lot of the in-person meetings that were scheduled, but also allows to focus more on pedestrianization and street closures as a way, an opportunity for favoring social distancing and safe interaction during the pandemic and during the lockdowns. So when our fieldwork starts in July this year, so a year after the beginning of the laboratory, the situation is quite different from what was planned. So on this image, I've collated a few pictures just to give you an idea. On the top left, you can see the main pedestrian area as it was planned, so with this colored pavimentation. And on the other picture, you can see what was there in this summer. So you can see on the top right one, the school streets. On the bottom, the same road on the top part where there is a bike lane, and then on the bottom left there's some kids playing, and I think you can see it, yeah. We've been interviewing many stakeholders, as I say, and the interviews reveal a very complex array of conflicts, which are still ongoing to an extent. So if on the one hand there has been a frustration by the citizens with regards to the organizers. There's also been very many conflictual relationships between the organizers themselves, from the city against the local partnership, which was subcontracted to organize the engagement process, which is called ATI. But also conflicts between the district and the council itself, so the more territorial part of the council and the general city council, but also within the council and the office that that controls like the heritage, protects the heritage. I'm not going to go into the details because it's a very complicated case study for all the different. We've been trying to map the different relations and conflicts, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. But one thing we realized, which has been emerging very clearly from the interview, is that although on the surface the conflicts might look being conflicts around the technical aspect of the project, for example, if it would be allowed or not to paint the road, which wasn't at the end. These are fundamentally conflicts around the procedure used on the way decisions are made. So this is just a couple of quotes to show you what I mean, specifically looking at the conflict between the citizen and the local association, which have been involved in this participatory process, and the organizers. So we find that all the associations, both the ones which are in favor of the project and the ones that are against, are extremely frustrated towards the experimental monitoring and participatory plan. So what representative says, you can read, there was always a promise that there would be opportunities for listening and consultation and so on. But honestly, this did not happen. Only psychical consultation took place. Which is reflected, for example, in how the decision taken around making the intervention permanent were taken before the participation and monitoring process was even concluded. So, which reveals a lot of the missed opportunity to organize better the different processes that were going on. On the other hand, one of the organizers clarified that participation, as I said, was not so much about, yes, we do the intervention, no, we don't make the intervention, but about how we do the intervention in a definitive executive phase. So in the face of a climate emergency, organizers do not think that reducing space for cars has to be a matter of discussion, of public discussion, to an extent denying the same very principle of tactical urbanism, which are experiments that can be taken off through discussion. But reallocating space is a very political and controversial action. And this means that the opposition or support for the different interventions, which cannot be expressed in the spaces of participatory planning, cripples in the very private meetings, in internal opposition, in personal pressure. So some citizens which have more resources would attend the council meetings and intervene at the end, or send letters, often obtaining personal adjustments to the plan. Which in turn means that there is an increasing lack of ownership towards the experiments, and I believe that they won't achieve any change, and also to an extent the corrosion of this space, in which some roads being slowly reopened without previous notice. But what are the reasons for such muddled and conflictual situation? So to answer to this question, I need to go back to the initial choice of wanting to take an experimental approach to street relocation. So surely there is a national and international pressure to conform to best practices and to an increasingly branding exercise around this type of intervention. However, there are also many more other factors that intervene. First of all, many have accused the ATI, which is this local partnership or local association, to have done a bad job, so they've missed the opportunity to engage. Some others have indicated the pandemic are responsible for reducing opportunity for engagement. But effectively, as I show with the quotes, there was no intention to participatory develop or discuss the plan, especially because there wasn't really a plan, nor a budget to implement it. So the council did not have the resources to respond to broader requests or to produce a well-thought plan, or even communicate that other changes were happening at a broader scale, which would include this street closure into the broader plan of rethinking mobility at the city level. So the council recognizes that the very reason for subcontracting the participatory process is the lack of personnel, the lack of resources, and also the lack of capacity within the planning department to be able to run the process. But it's also a way to escape the anger of the motorists and opponents because no one had the leadership to do so. And to an extent, the vagueness of the plan alleviates also the workload of the local planners, 2 of which are ready to retire, and there would be no replacement. And when several times we and other associations ask for any sort of modeling or of traffic flows have been done in link to the intervention, we realize that nothing has been done because there are no resources to do so. So this experimental approach leaves space for withdrawal and leaves space for no commitment. So the Torino Mobility Lab became a floating element ready to be taken away at any time when local politics will change. And the imminent choice of the imminent elections have been mentioned many times in the interviews. So experiments give the opportunity to attempt change without disturbing too much automobility and without disturbing too much motorists in the area. So as such, also the idea of tactical urbanism as a bottom-up, collaborative and place-based initiative is somehow emptied to signify instead painting roads or set up a couple of benches, whilst its agile and mutable form is used to muddle the plot of who is responsible for taking decisions. So far I sounded a bit negative, so I wanted to really finish the presentation in a bit of a brighter consideration. And this is a picture from the first stage of the pedestrianization, so summer 2020. So while the decision on the strategic role of this big plan for rethinking mobility in San Salvario was developed at the elsewhere, I would say, so outside of these participatory spaces, the local association took the opportunity to leave these interventions or temporary interventions as opportunities to rethink the quality of public space. So not intervention around mobility, but around how we live together in the streets of our neighborhood. And since the beginning of the project, and also thanks to the networking promoted by the ATI, the local association partnership, each pedestrian road had been adopted by one of the local actors, a school, a community center, which lived the road as somehow an extension of their territorial presence and used this road to meet and welcome other citizens. So this is an attitude which becomes fundamental also because it helps mitigating some of the more substantial conflicts which are happening at the local level. So for example, whilst the council is delaying processes and doesn't manage to even install some of the benches that have been promised, the local association will bring their chairs and sit there and create spaces of discussion and active listening where they will talk, and they will talk with the other citizens to explain them why it's so important to close some roads to cars. So here, the action of some of citizens have been responsible of some responsible urban residents, we generate some bottom-up governance actions, which are framed around the concept of caring for public space, which are in direct opposition with the more managerial, technocentric, post-political attitude adopted by the council. And they start from the territorial relationship, which are very strong in San Salvario, which were those that were open to change and would have been able to nurture change. And we think that
just to come in 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. And the reason why some of the pedestrianization are still in place after a year is also thanks to this voluntary intervention, which are a resource in the hand of the council. And we argue that such interaction could have been nurtured if the localized co-design of intervention was linked to discussion at a broader scale, as many interviewees have told us. So discussion on a broader scale around integrating mobility planning, in which different needs and voices were heard. And such different approach to co-design would have allowed citizens to focus more broadly than just about our street, my street, but allowing a leap of meaning to rethinking mobility behind being purely an individual choice in conflict with others, but as a co-produced good, linking in line with what has been called an approach of common mobility. So just to conclude, if we go back to the initial 3-level experiment, we can conclude that the street level experiment is to an extent has worked, but is not fully delivered also because of lack of sync between the engagement process and the availability of resources. And some of the interventions are postponed to 2023, but we are not sure if they're gonna go ahead because the elections are happening in the next month. The second level, the governance experiment, has definitely failed, but has also created a great frustration, which transformed a potential space open to change in a place where a lot of antagonism reigns, and where those associations which were opposing, which were supporting the project, are less open to dialogue. There are, as I showed, however, some openings where the local association had the time to own this change. On a city level, I would say, and a broader planning level, I think a lesson can be learned. And it's a lesson which goes back to my initial question, and which that until planning decisions are taken within the same frameworks of fragmented participatory processes, a private interest-led decision-making, but also the dismantlement of public planning bodies in favor of public-private collaboration, which is the same planning reality which has nurtured our automobility, then top-down experiments will not be able to go further than creating some better area of public space, which might be soon gentrified. However, territorial actors and associations, when are given time, resources, and trust, can be actually of great help in starting moving away from antagonism towards agonism, using MOVE terms, and also from a focus on individualized movements toward potentially rethinking mobility and its shortcoming as a shared responsibility. And yeah, so this is more or less what we have so far. This, as I said, is an ongoing process, but it would be really interesting to know what you think about this work, and share and maybe discuss what it means also for other places in Europe and abroad that are trying to decarbonize transport using this type of intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ercilia. That was an interesting presentation, highlighting the complexity and contested coexistence of the different meanings and processes linked to the reimagining of urban mobility and public space. Now we have our third presenter, Jules Townsend from the Community Rail Network. Jules has recorded her presentation, so we'll play her talk now. However, Jules will join us for the Q&A session. Now, Jules' talk is on the crucial role of community engagement and empowerment in achieving swift, sure, and just progress to decarbonize transport.
Hi everyone, I'm really delighted to be speaking to you today on this really important topic. We've already heard today from keynote speakers on the urgency and complexity of the task at hand, as well as place-based examples pointing to how we may be able to better approach and understand the challenges involved. And I hope to complement those insights, sharing experiences of communities that we're working with to enable and encourage more people to use rail as a key part of sustainable transport. So a bit about us, firstly. Community Rail Network is a national umbrella organisation that champions and supports a growing grassroots movement. We now have 74 community rail partnerships around Britain. These are small community-based organisations that promote rail, work with rail industry partners, and deliver a range of engagement activities locally. There are also more than 1,000 station friends groups around the country, and these are volunteers or schools or community groups that have adopted a station, carrying out gardening, arts projects, events, and other activities that bring people together with the station as a focal point. And Community Rail is a grassroots movement. It's community-led, but its growth has been encouraged and nurtured and funded by the rail industry and local and national government, and with a bit of help from us too. And I propose that not only does Community Rail have a part to play in transport decarbonisation within its localities, but it has important lessons and insights too to offer practitioners and decision makers and researchers across the transport and sustainability fields. Drawing on case study analysis and semi-structured interviews, I'm going to show how Community Rail contributes in a range of ways under these 5 headings. to the complex social challenges of transport decarbonisation. And I will refer to how its nature and activities align with a range of cross-disciplinary research on how we might bring about more sustainable mobility and ways of living. And a couple of examples on this slide to give you a flavour of the literature that I'm drawing on. And these alignments are explored in more detail in my conference paper. But generally on my slides, I'm providing community rail images and quotes to illustrate my arguments. So many community rail activities involve working with marginalised groups, children and young people. And the movement generally has a strong focus on social inclusion. Creative projects are very common, celebrating diversity and stimulating self-expression, and sometimes addressing stigma, like the Penistone Line's Dwell Time project on mental health. Some initiatives engage with specific groups to understand their needs and to help the railway respond to those, such as the Bentham Line's work to make stations and their staff dementia friendly. And increasingly, community rail is working with children and young people in an empowering way. Kent CRP's partnership, for example, with Sheppey College helps students to develop skills while gaining travel confidence and considering work and training opportunities that they might access using the railway to broaden their mobility horizons. And the evidence shows that these projects are not only well received, but they actively open up sustainable travel to different groups, often with major, possibly life-altering benefits for those individuals. These initiatives also build a sense of cohesion and support and understanding locally among participants and partners. In some cases, they connect people across difference and locations and help people to feel part of a community of which the railway forms an important component and in which they can play an active role. And these sorts of initiatives resonate strongly with academic arguments that to achieve sustainable development, we must nurture social capital and community vitality, and suggestions that social inequity hinders climate action, and so we need to consider climate and social justice together. Our evidence also shows how community rail in aiming to influence behaviour works with local identities. Community rail communications use local landscapes, culture, histories as resources. Campaigns are positive and sometimes playful, and they exude pride, and they go beyond simply showing the benefits of rail travel. They demonstrate how the railway is part of the fabric of the locality and its heritage. An example is Devon and Cornwall Rail Partnership's Lou Valley Heritage Campaign, which takes local people's stories and memories of the area and uses those to promote rail tourism. As well as communications, many community rail partnerships and groups run Try the Train initiatives and social events, which enable people to give rail a go in a fun, relaxed, supportive context. And I think while further inquiry would be helpful on the impact of specific initiatives, there appears to be an overall cumulative positive effect on rail use. So railway data shows that lines with community rail partnerships see greater passenger growth. And correspondingly, our members attest to how individuals and families are rediscovering rail through these activities, or discovering it for the first time, realising its convenience or relevance to their lives, and enjoying themselves in the process. And often the starting points are very low levels of familiarity. So many children and young people that our members are working with have never been on a train, and many older people haven't for many years. And it seems from community rail experience that for many people, just getting on public transport can be a daunting prospect. And perhaps we need to better acknowledge and understand that. But perhaps we don't need to overcomplicate how we overcome that. Just maybe music trains and Santa specials and bucket and spade trips and other fun activities have a more serious part to play than we might initially think. I suggest that these types of approaches respond well to academics' arguments that climate communications have failed to change behaviours because of not resonating at an everyday level, because the topic's scary nature can make people shy away, and because the very exercise of trying to change behaviour can undermine people's sense of identity, which is rooted in their lifestyles and localities. Research indicates that this is likely to be a particular factor within transport due to the car being so embedded in many people's lifestyles and culturally symbolic. So drawing on the local and normalising sustainable transport linked to local values may help to overcome this. But I'd underline that this isn't about just better persuading people to make different choices. A wealth of research shows us that we can't simply persuade people to switch from unsustainable behaviours. Research shows, and we can see in community rail, that transport modes are constrained and habitual. Social practice theorists contend that onus should not be placed on the individuals to make the change, but on wider systems and not only infrastructure, but social meanings and competencies too. And they talk of recruiting people socially into different practices. Social psychologists, of course, talk about the need to support people through multiple stages of change to achieve behavioural shifts, while others emphasise the power of feelings and especially the sense of belonging in guiding behaviour. And our evidence shows that what happens quite instinctively within community rail tallies really well with these various concepts. But as well as enhancing inclusion and familiarity and bringing people together, community rail can be seen facilitating dialogue and collaboration between the community and rail companies, between other transport providers, local government and other partners. And this is sometimes specifically about overcoming particular barriers, such as to better connect rail with walking, cycling and buses. For example, Three Rivers worked with local authorities and Sustrans to identify footpath improvements and to make those to improve access to stations. And they've also just launched a combined ticket that works on buses and trains in Southampton following extensive partner liaison. And community rail experience, I should say, generally shows that a lack of modal integration for car-free journeys is a ubiquitous issue, which is often challenging to overcome despite some encouraging examples like this. In other cases, community rail is engaging local people and partners to try to establish the community's broader vision for the railway or station. South West Wales Connected's shared visioning workshops brought local people and partners together to work through what they wanted from their railways and stations and to inform the community rail partnerships ongoing work. And this fits really well, I think, with research suggesting that deliberative methods can help to identify acceptable and beneficial and inclusive ways forward on sustainability issues. And although most community rail initiatives aren't as self-consciously about deliberation as this, community rail can be seen to commonly achieve results by drawing on and bringing together different strands, different parties, different views, working with transport operators and local government and negotiating constructive ways forward. I think there's a rich theme here for practitioners and researchers to further explore the possibilities of deliberative, collaborative approaches in transport decarbonisation, especially where community partners can lead. Our evidence is also clear that community rail it identifies itself as part of local communities with a web of local links, a wealth of local knowledge and an ability to build momentum and awareness from the bottom up, empowering at the grassroots level. And there are indications that community rail wouldn't be able to do what it does, and at least in quite the same way, if it were part of the rail industry or local government. Community rail clearly draws strength from its position and identity within communities, and it also gains from being part of a wider national network which enables learning and cross-fertilisation and confidence building between localities. And as I've referenced, community rail's ability to help different groups to have a voice, to empower and enable is at the heart of its ethos. And so in these ways, community rail corresponds with research demonstrating the potential for grassroots networked and bottom-up change to respond to the climate emergency and deliver more sustainable forms of development. And it chimes with some academics' arguments that we need to actively shift power towards the grassroots to achieve the changes we need. And lastly, under my fifth theme, community rail, as I hope you've noticed, inherently demonstrates the power of communities to effect positive change in relation to their locality and in regards to transport. And that builds positivity and pride and efficacy and ownership towards the railway and sustainable transport as a whole. And I propose this is crucial if we're to overcome the embeddedness of the private car and achieve modal shift. At more and more stations, the community's involvement and sense of ownership is right there, it's striking. And this seems to affect the way that people view and treat the station, with community murals, wildlife gardens and other community facilities helping to spur reduced antisocial behaviour, increased footfall and use, and stations being seen as hubs for community development. And we see in these cases a blurring of the boundaries between the station and the community, and the station becoming an emblem of positive community action and community action on sustainability specifically. And I think this is likely to be helpful in engendering more sustainable transport behaviours. Many researchers talk of the need for hopefulness and self-efficacy and positive leadership at all levels in achieving greener behaviours, while feelings of hopelessness stymie that change, including in regards to transport behaviours specifically. I contend that nurturing efficacy at community level is a vital and often overlooked tool in advancing greener transport. Our evidence also attests to community involvement and empowerment being able to affect behavioural and structural change simultaneously in mutually supporting ways. And indeed, there are signs of behaviour change emerging unexpectedly from people being involved in or feeding into improvements in transport services and infrastructure. Might the difficulties of selling modal shift to resistant or disinterested or constrained individuals be broken down by instead engaging the community collectively in creating positive, practical change that benefits the community and enables the community to make sustainable transport work better for them and break down the barriers that they experience and identify. I think if the community feels ownership of local sustainable transport networks and their enhancement, might behavioural change naturally follow? I think there are positive signs within community rail. The economist Kate Raworth argues that breaking out of negative and destructive feedback loops and creating regenerative ones, is vital for achieving sustainable development. And this seems pertinent in transport. Many researchers attest to the vicious cycle of car-orientated development and how this has created unequal mobility, eroded communities and disrupted healthy, sociable, sustainable ways of living. To break free of this, we need to focus more on strengthening and empowering communities, putting them in the driving seat of change, enabling the community to create its own social imaginary around green mobility, to create a virtuous circle of communities spearheading and using and further developing their own vision for the alternatives to cart-based and high carbon travel. I've outlined 5 facets of a locally led approach as exhibited in Community Rail, which marry up with wide-ranging research on sustainable transport and development. But this approach isn't without its challenges, and despite the considerable support Community Rail gets from government and industry, we still identify systemic hindrances. And I'm just pointing to these briefly, given the time constraints, to stimulate consideration of how we can further aid progress across community-led efforts on sustainable transport. And these barriers, they're often to do with entrenched technocratic, car-centric thinking, holding up, stymieing ambition and causing us to shy away from the more challenging approaches and alternative visions that we perhaps need. A lack of recognition of the social importance of sustainable transport. We need to stop seeing the social side of transport as the soft and fluffy side. I think better understanding how we can optimise the social benefits of sustainable transport, who gains and how, could be powerful in moving this agenda forward. Not climbing the ladder of participation. So as I've suggested, engaging and empowering communities holds great promise, but the tick box consultation, which can be commonplace in transport, really isn't a substitute for that. Silos hold up locally led change in many ways, not least around modal integration. Failing to treat communities as genuine partners is clearly fundamental to this. We need to facilitate and be responsive to local action, not resisting it. And seeing sustainability as an add-on or secondary to economic growth is deeply problematic, and not just in regards to transport. Sustainability really does need to become our business as usual. So I want to finish by referencing the common ground that Community Rail shares with walking and cycling groups, friends of parks, conservation groups, citizen panels, and the many other locally led initiatives that are out there. There is a rich tapestry of civil society with links to and interests in sustainable transport, and it's there if you scratch beneath the surface in any locality in the UK, and I suspect in other countries too. These groups, campaigners, volunteers, people, they're surely crucial to creating the great social shifts we need to achieve decarbonised sustainable transport, especially when they form strong links of collaboration locally and between localities. And I think that's something practitioners and researchers can support. We must not only work with these people and groups, but understand them and their goals and how they intersect with ours, and empower them to extend their reach, their power and their influence, and enable them to get on with making the positive change we need. Thank you very much for listening. Please do get in touch if we can help you to work with or learn from Community Rail. Thank you.
Thank you, Jules, for that great message for policymakers that localized, interactive, empowering approaches may be the most effective in achieving practices and sustainable forms of development. and can speed up change to achieve a just transition. So our final presenter today is Adam Peacock from Keele University and Philip Thiessen from Connected Places Catapult. And their talk is on community-centric approach to developing sustainable transport in a smart local energy system. The co-authors are Sandhya Nagaraju and Alberto Gonzalez Zaira from Connected Places Catapult and Christoph Mazur from NG UK. So over to you for the final presentation.
Okay, yes. So hi everyone, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. My name is Adam Peacock. I'm a postdoctoral research associate at Keele University. Here with me today is my colleague, Philip Thiessen. I'll let you introduce yourself, Philip.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Thiessen. I work in the Connected Places Catapult. I lead the business case and impact assessment team. But before I joined the Catapult, I spent 15 years of my career in government and a lot of time in Department for Transport, being the main economist in charge of cycling and walking. I would say I brought the Local Sustainable Transport Fund from the first day we appraised any projects until we actually finalized the evaluation 7 years later. So that was my largest individual project, I would say. So yes, decarbonisation, very, very close to my heart. But yeah.
Great, thank you. And so we're here today to sort of present, I think, something that fits quite nicely with the rest of the presentations here. So we're both working on separate work packages, but sort of very interconnectedly on a project called Zero Carbon Rugeley. It's a £3 million Innovate UK funded project, with the aim to basically create a smart local energy system. Whilst Philip sort of leads on the sort of mobility work package, I myself lead on the user-centric design work package, and we'll get a bit more into what user-centric design is shortly. But just as a quick introduction, it aims to get past this sort of tick box exercise of community engagement and look at how we can create sufficient mechanisms and methods of engaging with communities as genuine partners within the design of the smart local energy system. In front of you, you can see sort of an array of different partners involved in the project. A lot of them are sort of locally focused. Keele and the New Vic Theatre and Chase Community Solar all sort of contribute to this user-centric design work package, with Connected Places Catapult leading on the mobility aspects, and with a variety of other important sort of local authorities, district councils and Staffordshire County Council and such. As I said, the objective is to design a smart local energy system for Rugeley. We started in March 2020, so we're very, very quickly running up to the end of the project. But there's a real distinctive focus on mobility, on the decarbonisation of transport and looking at how we can change mobility locally. And one of the things that Philip and I have both been very clear on from the start is that we need a very sort of place-based local approach to this. If we're going to take Rugeley as a template, and look at how we can scale up some of the techniques we develop and some of the learnings we have, we need to really hone in on what it is that makes this sort of local, place-based. There's a clear need for some more sort of technical modelling, as Philip's about to get into shortly. But also we recognised from that that there was a need to draw upon local knowledge and create methods through which communities could engage with us on the project, with the output therefore being between us this sort of co-produced mobility improvement plan. So I'll hand over to Philip to talk about some of these sort of more technical aspects of the project. Philip, if you just want to let me know when you want me to jump to the next slide.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, in case anyone doesn't really know, is not familiar with the smart local energy grid, this is essentially trying to kind of put less pressure on the national grid. And while we are moving to decarbonising and largely electrifying transport and heating and commercial, there's recognition that the national grid will probably not have the capacity to accommodate that increase. So there's more and more need for local grids in a sense, and the smart local energy system is supposed to be a local grid with lots of generation, storage, and balancing ways. Now, other projects are following under the same Innovate UK call are doing that, but none of them, as far as we are aware, are actually giving mobility the role that it needs, because arguably at the moment, cars and buses and trains don't really engage much with the local energy system, because they obviously fuel themselves from the fuel station. But in a future way, in 10 years, 15 years time, you have to design a system. If you're designing a new system now, you need to design it with the need for electrified transport in the future. So that's one of the backgrounds why we made a focus on bringing mobility into this project of what other people might consider it's just about electricity. So as Adam had said, we kind of, the first step was we needed to understand, so what quantum are we talking about? Sort of how much might there be in terms of how much might mobility need in terms of future demand on the electricity system? And one of the first tasks was therefore to get a sense of the size of the transport demand now and in the future. Now, Rugeley doesn't have any kind of existing transport model around it that was suitable for us to kind of get the data from. So what we did, we kind of designed our own little kind of small scale model, starting from mobile phone data. So we have access to the Telefonica data set. It's basically they're using the observed trip patterns from their O2 users in the UK, but then they scale it up to represent the full population, sort of by detailed geographical data. I think it's an output area level. They know how many Telefonica users they have in there, but they know from published statistics what the makeup of that area is. So they have a way of aggregating. But essentially, we have the data we can get the data by all Great Britain MSOAs, medium output areas. Too much detail here probably, but essentially what we could obtain there is all the movements between these MSOAs by either rail or road mode. So if you think about mobile phone data, it's not, it can detect movement by individual mobile phones. It can't detect it at too much detail because it depends on the mobile phone mast, so to speak. But essentially, if they see that a lot of people move at the same speed, at the same place, stopping at the kind of familiar patterns, then it's possible to say, oh, these people are on the train. That's how the data is available by train and road modes. But the rest is probably too much detail on this slide. So if you want to move on. So what we did, we created a model in a sense. As I said, we have the data for the whole of UK, but that's far too much detail. It's also would create far too much too large of a data requests. So what we focused on are the five, I think it's 5 MSOAs that are directly located in Rugeley and around, and then sort of further around the country, we aggregate more and more zones into zones, and say Scotland is as a whole, Scotland, and what do we mean by removing external trips? We're not that interested if someone drives from Scotland into London or something, and even though they could potentially drive through Rugeley or through the area, they're very unlikely to affect our program, and also we have very little influence over them. Even if they were to stop and refuel their car in the Rugeley area, there's nothing. All our activities, all our policies, so to speak, won't have any impact on them. So that's basically taking them out. That's the first point, removing external trips from the model. We then, as I said, the data only says this mobile phone is moving on a road or it's moving on a rail. So on the road side, we used sort of published data from DFT on traffic counts to get an estimate of how many vehicles, how many of those movements might be in a car, might be in a bus, or maybe a lorry. And finally, when we know that they're moving in a car, doesn't mean that it's necessarily a car, because on average, each car has 1.5, 1.6 people in it. So similar with a bus, there are on average 10 people in a bus. So to come up with the vehicle movements, we used again published data on typical occupancy. But at the same time, we kept the data on people, because that's equally important if you want to move people, encourage people to adapt other modes. You want to make sure that you, for every person who moves from car to cycling, say, you're still not removing necessarily the car, but only for every second person you remove the driver. Next slide, please. Finally, we then numbers checks, but one thing quite important is that because the mobile phone data network only recognizes a movement once you have moved clearly from one mobile phone mast to another, and so that typically means a 1 to 2 kilometer movement. Before that, it's ambiguous whether you've actually just picked up slightly different combination of phone masts. So these very short distance trips are not really filled up, and you can see that here in this blue line, which is the original distribution, length distribution we got from the mobile phone data. So you can see very few trips that are in the shortest distance category, and so we had to infill those trips respectively to fill them in. Anyway, next slide, please. So that just finally we got the mobile phone data by period, and we wanted to know them by hours. And final tricks, just in case anyone's familiar with that, we then made sure that we are still created a realistic figure. We compared it to the trips, the number of trips that are prescribed by the Department for Transport's National Trip and Model, sorry, the National Trip and Model, and we made small corrections to ensure that our total number of trips stay within that national kind of trip database, and found that we didn't have any issues with our method. And yeah, the next one, please. So we get these kind of desire lines and OD matrices, so we could see basically where are who are the people who drive, or where do the people come from who drive into Rugeley, where do the Rugeley residents, where did they drive to, and again, and also identify sort of internal Rugeley to Rugeley journeys, and then could compare to that sort of where do the emissions get created basically, yeah, you see some of these charts up there. What we then started doing is we sort of built some scenarios that we said, okay, if we do in the do nothing scenario, this is a likely picture, but if we manage to impose some behavior change, or maybe we have better technology coming forward, then these key metrics of energy and emissions and congestion could be varied, and we sort of have a calculation for these what we call external costs. But those are just for the record. For the record, on a daily basis, in the Rugeley area, creates about £30,000 of marginal external costs. But that's purely for the people more interested in transport modelling. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, final step. We had the data for 2016, but we are more interested in the design year of 2030. So we use the Department for Transport trip model to increase the journeys to 2030, and also had to take into account a few more local planning decisions. Is detail. Next one, please.
That's back to me.
Oh, sorry, that's you. Let's go one back. Then I had actually, sorry, I had a few notes that I didn't. One back, please, if you can. One back. So basically, what we now have is we have these, as I mentioned, we have scenarios that between behavior shift and technological change, we basically have a forecast of the 2030 main sort of impact on energy. And in a nutshell, what we want to use it is with the rest of the consortium. We want to see at what, in a sense, what sort of interventions can we have in order to either reduce the energy need, or how much do we need to increase the supply by having more solar panels or more wind, in a sense. And through our partners at ENGIE, or called Equinus, they have another large tool which basically does an overall cost optimizer and says, okay, here are certain things that you could do at a certain cost to reduce demand from mobility. Equally, you could spend the same money or maybe more or less money to increase the energy in the system, and all the way we kind of have an iterative progress. But in order to know how far we can shift, especially behavior shift, and at what cost and so forth, that's impossible to do sort of at a national level, and that's where we need to really engage with the local population and local conditions on the ground to have a good understanding of that. And that's what Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. So I think the key points there were that there was a variety of sort of technical modelling done to understand travel patterns, but to develop some scenarios around behavioural shifts. One of the things that this project does is to involve users right from the start. So we've been engaging with users throughout a pandemic, which has been quite interesting to say the least. But this idea that if you can engage people, not only is it sort of more economical, can prevent cost modifications later on, but also around these ideas of community empowerment, around actually allowing people to have a say in what the future of the transport system can look like. And so key questions we had, what local contextual knowledge regarding mobility can we get from the community? As Philip said, this model can only go so far. It can't give us on the ground details. What are the local values? How do they match up to some of the behavioural scenarios and shifts that we've come up with? What are the current experiences of local trips? And, we can see where people are coming from and perhaps by how. But what are the experiences there, and again, how does that link into everything? And finally, what parts of Rugeley as a geographical space are difficult to use via these low carbon modes? So we've run a variety of different methods to engage with the community, to understand more. This one was quite simple. We put up a map on Zoom back in the era where everything was still on Zoom as it kind of is now. And we just allowed, using the annotate tool, for people to show us, what is local transport like in your community? What are your experiences of it? What are the key problems?
To intervene to just remind you that you have only 3 minutes to wind up.
No problem. I'll move quickly. And then we converted that into sort of GIS. So we were able to then take that away and give the consortium a better understanding of some of these current experiences and what the barriers are to engaging with local active travel. Designed an entire sort of community-centric approach. We call it the Mapping Mobility Project. We've got some additional funding, and this basically uses applications like Strava, Map My Tracks, to get people out collecting the routes they take via active travel. We've got real emphasis on increasing active travel as a low carbon mode. So to understand what the current routes that they take in the community are, and we created an entire citizen science-led project around that. Even teaching local people key GIS skills to conduct the data analysis as well. So it was sort of run by the community, led by the community. It's ongoing, it's going well, and there's increasing interest around that. And effectively, the way it works is that whenever you use one of these apps, you get a point. That point can then be If we get like a correlation of points, we understand that that's a key route that is used by different users, and therefore we can start looking at actually where active travel is taking place most in the local area. That's particularly useful if you're starting to think about investment and where you would start concentrating investment to start that change if you wanted to improve active travel infrastructure. We're also a fan of sort of more creative methodologies, so getting people actually doing things, talking around problems by actually engaging. And so what we did was we got residents to design the sort of transport system of the future in Rugeley, to split into groups and then basically act as new transport planners and to competitively rework the Rugeley transport system, which really gave us a good understanding of the local values people hold. And again, we can compare those to some of the scenarios that we've developed, what the sort of tipping points to engaging with change are, what we'd have to do in order to perhaps market these changes locally, and also the types of modes of travel that they would be interested in actually engaging with. Again, helping make this as relevant to the local people as possible. So overall, between the work Philip's been doing and the work I've been doing, what we get is sort of wider sort of relational mobility patterns are established, and we understand where people are coming from and perhaps the areas we should be engaging with, but also talking to people in a more territorial sense and a more local sense. And we get a really quite detailed understanding of local mobility, where the community have helped engage with us and have been empowered to actually share their experiences and actually influence the final design that we develop. And we get a better understanding in return of the main routes that they're using, the sort of values that they hold and the sort of propositions we would need to develop. We get an understanding of where to sort of concentrate local investment, but also a lot of our modes involved skills and training, and also therefore sort of serve to empower local communities at the same time. So rather than just being sort of taking sort of data from people, we've really developed this sort of trusted two-way relationship to engaging with the local community on all of this. And I think that should be us just about finished in time.
Yeah, and of course there's the additional benefit that in the end, if we actually implement any of this, we are implementing it. We know that people want to use it, and we're not just designing something from a guidebook somewhere, and in the end, it completely failed what the people in Rugeley need. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Adam and Philip, for a really interesting talk on combining travel pattern modeling with user-centric input to test different levels of transition and adoption of new technologies. So that brings us to the end of all the talks, and I should say that all the four presentations complemented each other really well.